So I noticed about half of you have submitted your first 3 pages of your paper so far. If you haven't yet, that's okay. I would just like for you to do it at some point today. That way I can make sure that you're on the right track, that you're at least putting something out, that you have work done on your papers. Again, I may have mentioned this last week. I'm not, the only thing I'm going to be have a hard deadline for are the final paper and the oral presentation at the end. But any assignments between now and then, I'm flexible with when it comes to deadlines, just because I know that you all have other things going on. But I would like to see this week, as we do 2 pages here, 2 pages there, that you're at least progressing forward. So that if you end the week and you don't have 7 pages quite yet, but you have 5 or 6, I can at least say, like, okay, they've done enough that they don't have to do a whole lot more. Whereas if we get to Friday and you've only done like 2 pages, then I'm going to be like, okay, like what's going on? Like, when you have a conversation. So again, if you don't have the full 3 pages, it's okay. But I would like for you to submit something today just so I can see what kind of progress you've made. We've also gotten to that point where, unfortunately, I don't have time to read all of your completed drafts and then give feedback on them. So now what's going to start happening is I'll comment where I can on the big issues I notice, but it's going to be up to you to pay attention in our Zoom sessions as much as possible and see what mistakes or what improvements other students have made and how you can mirror those improvements in your own papers. So if you see someone else who maybe doesn't have a great structure for their paragraph, you're like, oh, like my paragraph looks like theirs, I should pay attention to make sure that I fix my structure accordingly. Or you see someone else that has a really good image analysis, you're like, oh, I kind of want to do what they want to do. I want to rework my analysis some. Please do that, because unfortunately I just don't have the free time to just go through and read everyone's paper, at least until we get to the conference period where I'm going to have to read all those and comment on all of them. Speaking of conferences, I assume all of you saw the announcement about conferences on Canvas. And if you didn't, I'm telling you now, there's an announcement on Canvas about the conferences. It's pretty straightforward stuff. We're still scheduling it the way we've always scheduled it. You'll schedule it through the Canvas link, the calendar link that you go to usually. And then all conferences will be held on Zoom in this personal meeting room of mine. It's going to be a little funky just because I like the face-to-face conversation more. But as long as you get your paper to me and I have time to comment on it, we should be fine. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. That being said, I'm going to be a little bit more of a stickler for submitting your paper to me 24 hours early before the conference appointment. And that's because when you submit it to me through Canvas, normally I could print it out real fast and then mark it up real fast with my pen or pencil. Because of the nature of commenting on it this way, where I can comment on the file and send it back to you, it's going to take me a little bit longer. So just account for that and submit to me earlier. Even if you don't have the full draft done, submit to me whatever you have. That way I can comment on that at the very least. So that way you're not flying blind with absolutely nothing. And if you finish the draft between when you submit the first one and our conference appointment, we can talk about it then. But I would rather you submit something than not submit anything at all, or submit something too late for me to really look at and comment on. What else was I going to say? So the appointment slots are open and available. You can start scheduling those now. I see some of you already have. If any of those appointment times don't work for you, the benefit of this is my schedule is super flexible now. So if you need to meet a little bit later in the day, in the afternoon or evening, I can absolutely do that for you. I don't have a whole lot going on most days, since I don't need to be on campus anymore, obviously. I would prefer not to have to meet on the weekends, just because I like to keep some days to myself. But if that's the only day that really works for you because you have other test assignments to work on and you just have a quick hour to spare on a Saturday, I can work with that and I can meet with you face-to-face then. So don't feel like if you have a scheduled time that doesn't work for you that you can't contact me to set up something else instead. I'm completely open to making it work for you as much as possible. The only thing is I can't push the deadline for the conference papers back any further than I think the 29th of April, because after that your papers are due and I need to start grading them because I need to get your final grades back to you as soon as possible. So for those of you who want to make the decision to either take an S or an S minus or the NC, whatever the new grading system is for the semester, you have the time to make that decision. It shouldn't take me a whole lot of time to grade your drafts and grade your final papers. The nice thing about something like this is I can look at your draft and look at how you've what kind of mistakes you fixed and be like, okay, cool, they did this, this, this. This paper is this grade or whatever. But the sooner I get those papers in, the easier it is for me to kind of get those grades back to you and for you to be happier, because I think you're all on the right track so far. Any questions generally right now about conferences or any concerns? Anyone feeling completely overwhelmed? You shouldn't. You're all doing pretty well. Cool. So what I would like to do today is take a look at a couple of examples that you all submitted. For those of you who did submit your first 3 pages today or last night, I had a chance to look over some of them. For those that I've seen so far, you've done some really nice work. You've made the improvements that me and your classmates suggested on your thesis statements, on your introductions, your second paragraphs, and now you're moving forward. So what I'll focus on today is looking at body paragraphs, specifically looking at body paragraphs that analyze the images that you're working with. So first off, make sure you're including the images in your paper. You don't need to include all of them, but include at least 1 or 2. For example, I was looking at George's just before the class today, and he put his image right before the paragraph where he starts talking about it. That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly great. Put it wherever it makes sense for you in your paper, but don't assume that I know the image that you're talking about. If it's something that you feel like I need to see for my own, make sure you include it in the paper. And if you want to talk about how to wrap your text around the image, so that way you're not taking up half a page of text when you could be using that space to write as well, we can talk about it and I can actually let you know. But please do include the images, at least 1 or 2, so that I can see what you're talking about. Stop licking me. Cool. So what I would like to do first is, let me share my screen with you. We're going to take a look at, so first of all, can everyone see this image here?
Yes.
Sweet. 1 person said yes, so I assume that everyone has. Cool. So this is Ryan's paper, and I like Ryan's paper because Ryan's, she made some really nice improvements or really nice changes from the suggestions that you and I gave her last week. Her thesis, her introduction, we thought was pretty good. It's really clear. She's focusing on the topic of immigration. And then I thought her thesis statement actually became more arguable and more focused from what it was last week. So the basic gist of it was that she's going to be talking about Trump and Obama's immigration policies and how one's more relaxed and one's a bit more aggressive, and how these are represented through political cartoons, either through bias or propaganda or depictions of current events, anything like that. But the real arguable part of our thesis is that the lack of this ability to come to any kind of agreement or to have any kind of discussion about immigration reform completely leaves immigrants out of the conversation. So people who want to come to the country and want to become citizens or want to immigrate to the country, who do want to see some kind of reform, who maybe want to have shorter waiting periods to receive green cards or whatever, because sometimes it can take a long time for that to happen. By constantly fighting over these issues, you're not actually solving any problems. And it's not just affecting immigrants from Mexico or Central America, because when we say immigrants, we usually assume that, but it's affecting immigrants from all over the world, whether it be from Europe, Asia, South America, wherever. So what I like about this is it's gotten a lot more specific and a lot more arguable, because now she's basically saying like, hey, they disagree and it's a bad thing because of this specific reason. So now I took a look. She basically, for the next couple of paragraphs, I'm going to skip over this for now, but she gives the background history. She talks about Obama's immigration policies and the things that he did that people liked and the things that he did that maybe people weren't as crazy about. And then the same thing for Trump, gives the background on what he has done, what he believes, etc. So that way, going into the paper, even if you don't know anything about these 2 guys, although I'm sure you do, you've got some kind of basis for their political views, for their views on immigration. So that way, when she goes and makes these claims in her analysis of her political cartoons, you don't think that she's assuming anything, and you don't think that she's kind of flying blind, doesn't know what she's talking about. She clearly has done the research on what issues are being represented in these cartoons. So then the paragraph that she brings in next, she finally gets into analyzing her first political cartoon. It's by a guy called Steve Strobe, and actually, I'm just going to kind of show you something real fast. I was Googling him beforehand. Can everyone see all these images?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is, I'm assuming that most of these are Steve Strobe's political cartoons. So we'll just look at this one here. It's Joe Biden, and he's posting a missing poster for his brain with a reward. Here's Bernie Sanders pointing a gun at a U.S. taxpayer looking for money for Medicare for all. Michael Avenatti, Donald Trump doesn't know how to treat women because he was accused and I think possibly convicted of abuse. So what are Steve Strobe's, this political cartoonist, what are his political leanings? We can assume conservative, but where on that kind of political conservative spectrum does he fall? Because there's lots of different conservatives. When I say Republicans or Democrats, we don't want to assume they're all the same. They generally have some of the same beliefs and some of the same ideas, but we don't want to assume that every single Republican is absolutely in agreement on the same things. So when we look at Steve Strobe's political cartoons, what kind of conservative is he? Or what are the issues that he really takes issue with, that he's constantly kind of bringing up and talking about?
Well, he's very right-wing.
Very right-wing, yeah. What makes you think that?
I mean, just like the way he like is attacking all like the big Democrats, like Bernie. I see Hillary, Joe Biden. Is that Biden?
Like
and
Biden over here, yeah.
And the last one where it said Donald Trump doesn't know how to treat women.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, this guy seems pretty right-wing because even I haven't really seen a whole lot of political cartoons personally attacking Bernie. And there are quite a few conservatives or Republicans who are, even if they don't agree with Bernie, seem to respect him and some of his ideas because he is supporting the working class, and Republicans also like to represent the working class. So it's rare that I see a political cartoon going after Bernie. So yeah, I think you're right. He's definitely on the farther right side. He's probably more conservative than what your average moderate Republican might be. Good. So absolutely. So Ryan is looking at this political cartoons of his. Oh, now I need to make it come back. Give me a second. I'm sorry. Okay. So this is a political cartoon that Ryan is analyzing first. And before we even look at what she's written so far, what do we notice about this image right here? So remember back to the first paper that you wrote, you were doing a kind of rhetorical analysis of images, looking at colors, looking at pictures, looking at words. What can we say about this political cartoon right here? Regardless of whether or not you agree with it or you think it's on the money or whatever it is, what can you assume about the artist or the producer of this image from what's inside the image itself? And Ryan, you can speak up too if you want to as well.
They're making fun of Obama's amnesty towards immigrants.
Okay, talk more about that. When you say amnesty, that means what?
Like like he's rewarding them in a way, or sort of letting them loose without consequence in a way.
Okay, yeah. So that seems to be the idea
I
here.
think that's what it was.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't remember. Oh, I was saying I think that's what it was. I don't remember for sure.
Definitely, this artist seems to think that that's the case, where Obama's immigration policies let people in without any kind of restrictions or any kind of condition or anything like that. So whether or not that's true, he certainly seems to think that is the case. And I'm sure there's different ways you could parse this, be like, oh, like he's referring to this specific policy. But I think you're right. This artist at least seems to assume that Obama is too relaxed on immigrants coming into the country. As the one guy says, we're leading to work on our illegal immigration policy. Obama says, this is my legal immigration policy, which apparently is to let people in. What else do we notice about this political cartoon that people find striking? What about the depiction of the immigrants themselves?
Everyone looks the same, sort of. There's no way of really distinguishing each person.
Yeah, I noticed that too. They all generally like the same like facial structure. Some have like goatees and mustaches and stuff. But yeah, for the most part, it's all just kind of like a copy and paste kind of image of like, okay, like I'm going to draw immigrants. They look like this, and they don't have the same facial structure or look as Obama or this guy here. But yeah, they're all kind of similar appearances, similar look and everything. What else? Does it matter that they're crossing the U.S.-Mexico border for the purpose of this cartoon?
I would say yes, because it seems that the central idea of this is about border control.
Yeah, I think that's right. So really, when they're talking about illegal immigration here, they're not talking about illegal immigration generally. They're really talking about, well, what's going on here at the U.S.'s southern border, and what can we be doing more here? Just a couple of other things that I just kind of noticed that I think are interesting or kind of amusing is he's got this depiction of this really long walled, long fence representing the U.S.-Mexico border. As a lot of you may know, the majority of the U.S.-Mexico border is not walled, and if it is walled, it's more like a fence. And there are some areas that aren't even really fenced just because there's such uninhabitable deserts or the river crossings that there seems to be no purpose in putting up a border. So it is interesting that he also puts up like a physical border stretching through the desert here as well. And you've got one guy down here burrowing underneath the wall, some people going through the wall, obviously people going over the wall. So clearly this artist is trying to say like, hey, like, you know, even if we had a physical barrier right now, it wouldn't be doing enough because we're still just doing too much to, we're not even trying to stop people who are coming in. We're not even trying to punish those who are breaking the law. So yeah, definitely a further right position to take. There are some Republicans who would say like, oh, like I have a problem with this, but I want to see a reform in certain policies so that way we can help these people work towards citizenship. Whereas this person is saying like, oh no, we're not, we need to be a lot harsher. We're being too lenient in what we're doing. So going to Ryan's paper here, I'll just kind of read it real fast. Steve Straub's political cartoon about President Obama portrays immigrants coming over from Mexico and entering the United States without any issues. Obama is allowing thousands of immigrants to enter the United States without any repercussions and has very loose laws regarding immigration. Also, this cartoon depicts the contrast between Obama's immigration policies versus the policies in place today. The laws today are working to reduce the number of immigrants coming into the United States and have created a strain between Republicans and Democrats. Obama's immigration laws created a lot of turmoil amongst the two parties because he was very eager to allow everyone a chance at the American dream. In addition, this political cartoon displays how easy it was to cross the border under the Obama administration, and that could lead to future complications because of the amount of undocumented people entering the United States. President Obama's views on immigration from Mexico were very loose and allowed for a lot of immigrants entering the United States without documentation. So I like this because it provides a really, even if you weren't to include the image itself, it does provide a nice kind of overview of what the image is about. So as an analytical paragraph, what about this paragraph works really well, and what are some things that could maybe be improved about it, or what could maybe be added to it to make it stronger? And anyone can speak up, whether it's I know it's Ryan's paper, but chances are, from what I looked, a lot of you have paragraphs similar to this as well. So I'd see maybe what we talk about that could help you in some way. Any ideas? Things you like, things you think could be better?
I like how she adds her own analysis about the laws in like today's society.
Okay, yeah. So you're talking about like, let me see if I can get my selector. So you're talking about like right here, the laws today, what we're going to do. Yeah. So there's definitely it kind of explains to us like, hey, part of the reason where we are, part of why we are, excuse me, my dogs are distracting me. Part of why we're at the place we are today is because of this interpretation of Obama's immigration policies. Because people thought that he was being too lenient, that's why today the laws are much stricter than they've been in the past, because people were kind of like, it's almost like a backlash to what it was beforehand. So yeah, it's a nice little contrast there, because we're obviously still dealing with this today. And obviously this is an argument that still informs our discussion of immigration in the present time. Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. No, you can't do that. You can't be a bad boy. Sorry about that. It's like having toddlers. Good. So I like that. So we're talking about like, okay, like here's, even though this is the way it was back in the past, here's how we can make sense of it today. Very good. What else? What else is working for this? What else could be improved?
I really like her analysis of it as well when she talks about the immigration laws. I think that a good noun to use, again, would be amnesty. Mm-hmm. But she could talk about how a lot of like the generalizations people tend to make from many immigrants coming over from Mexico. Not to say that those are true, but a lot of people have their own impression of it, and that's why they view amnesty as such a terrible thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I pulled the definition right here because for some people that may be a concept they haven't heard before. But yeah, amnesty, an undertaking by the authorities to take no action against specified offenses or offenders during a fixed period, an official pardon for people who have been convicted of political offenses. You'll see amnesty a lot sometimes after, you'll see it after war sometimes, depending on if like rebel groups have fought against the main government in some way and they reach some kind of compromise or agreement. The main government might be like, okay, well, we're gonna provide amnesty to the rebels because we've agreed to come to this kind of agreement together or to this kind of compromise. But yeah, amnesty I think is a really helpful word too because it's used by activists quite a lot when they're asking for amnesty for certain immigrant groups or all immigrant groups depending on the organization, and it does kind of provide a contrast to it at least shows like what a lot of further right Republicans, or I should say conservatives, believe, that because these policies are so lax, they're basically the same thing as amnesty. It's basically like you're not doing anything about this problem at all. So yeah, so I like that idea where if she wanted to, she could see like where she can work in this idea of amnesty and whether it's true or not, or whether they are assuming too much about Obama's policies. Because I'll be quite honest, until Trump came along, Obama was called by many immigrants the deporter-in-chief because he had deported more immigrants than any of the previous presidents combined. I want to say at least the first three. So they called him deporter-in-chief because even though he was doing these things with DACA and implementing other policies, he still was deporting a great number of people. But a lot of conservative politicians or conservative cartoonists didn't focus on that aspect of it because they were so focused on other things. So there's definitely some kind of breakdown or divide there where they think he's providing amnesty when in actuality, it's much more complicated than that. In fact, things are a lot more complicated than most political cartoons show them to be. The thing that I'm looking at with this paragraph, because I agree, I think the style is really good. It's always very clear what she's talking about. It's always very clear the flow of the paragraph. What I think I would like to see more of are concrete details from the image itself that we could fix these ideas to. So specifically, like, you know, this cartoon depicts the contrast between Obama's immigration policies versus the policies in place today. She can maybe talk about how this physical border wall is being essentially torn down by these immigrants. They're bursting through the wall here. They're starting to tear down the wall here. They're jumping over it. They're burrowing underneath it. So that's something that the physical detail in the ad itself or in the cartoon itself that she could bring in to help prop up her argument. Because no matter what you do, and this goes for everyone's analysis of their, whether it's cartoons or ads or commercials or wherever it might be, political art, you always want to be fixing your analytical ideas to some kind of concrete details in the image itself. So that way if you say like, oh, you know, this alcohol ad promotes rape culture, we see this in this ad because the man takes a very dominant position over the woman, just as an idea. But that way we can kind of see how you're getting your conclusions from this image or from this ad itself. So I agree, there's lots of really good ideas here. I would like to see some of them connected to concepts within the political cartoon itself. That way we can see the connection between Steve Strobe, who's clearly a pretty vocal mouthpiece for this further right wing of the Republican Party, and the manifestation of those views, like what kind of consequences those views have. Because Steve Strobe is not alone in thinking of things this way. It just so happens that he seems to be one of the more prominent political cartoonists. So again, really good work so far, but I think it could be stronger by kind of incorporating those very clear, concrete details to kind of focus on. And not just the speech either, not just the words, but also the images itself. Not a whole lot of like complicated use of color here, but still really interesting how the immigrants are portrayed. Good. Would others like to take a look at, again, we don't have time to go through everything with the submissions that we received over the last couple of hours, but would anyone like to take a look at maybe like a paragraph or so, or a section from their own submission, or volunteer their submission?
We can look at mine if we want to.
Right on. I'm all about it.
I don't,
Sweet. So was there a specific section you wanted us to look at? Because I think a lot of us thought that your intro was pretty strong.
yeah, I added a new paragraph. Honestly, a lot of the part of the 3 pages was I kind of had a bunch of directions I kind of wanted to go in at the same time.
Okay.
So we could look at maybe towards like the bottom, maybe like one of the last couple paragraphs, just see.
Of your first page or later on?
Probably later on.
Like this one here?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That's possible. Yeah, that works.
So, though media is the cause of panic amongst the general public in scenarios of natural disaster and pandemic, there are several important underlying causes to examine. Importance of nutrition during times of disease. Another underlying cause of the panic is born out of humans.
Oh, wait, I meant to not make that. That was supposed to be the intro sentence to a new paragraph, and then I was going to – sorry. Another was supposed to be the start of a new paragraph.
That's okay. So where should I begin?
Another?
Yeah.
Another
underlying cause of the panic is born out of humans' nature as social beings. The 21st century has brought with it the dawn of many more opportunities for virtual social interaction, most notably social media. Though social media is often very helpful, it creates an opportunity for increased conformity amongst the human race. Just as people buy the clothes that an Instagram influencer may flaunt on their account, people feel the need to go out and buy grocery store and home necessities because they see their friends doing the same on any number of social media platforms, or to be quite honest, even not their friends. According to Victoria B. Kempis, the virus currently... What's up?
On that one, I wasn't sure. Does that count as my citation if I say according to the author of the article? Or
Yeah.
do I have to do the parentheses?
You don't need to. So if you introduce your quote like this, like according to so-and-so, you don't need to do a parenthetical citation. However, you do need to include the page number if there is a page number. If this is just an online article, you get rid of this entirely. But let's say like if this were a journal article and you said, according to Victoria Bekempis, blah, 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 and then you just put the page number and paragraphs at the very end back there. But yeah, you're right. So if you introduce your quotes like this, and it's an online source, you don't need to provide an annotation. The exception be, I'm sorry, a citation. The exception being that if you have 2 pieces by the same person, in parentheses at the end, you'd specify which of the sources it is. So if you had 2 articles by Bekempis, you might be like, according to Victoria Bekempis, and at the end say the title of the article, which would be virus in the US or something, whatever it is. But yeah.
Okay.
So according to Victoria Bekempis, the virus currently poses little threat to the US food supply. It is panic buying itself that is causing the real disruption. Therefore, grocery stores don't display their barren shelves because of an overall lack of food or storage, but because the panic buying or phantom demand, which is increased by social media, puts a strain on their transportation channels. Actually, here it's great. Yeah, here you put that citation there because we don't know who said phantom demand. So I like that you put that there. Good. Therefore, the true threat to the food supply is not the virus at all, but social media-driven panic buying of grocery store staples that would be beneficial in a food crisis. The same pack mentality is brought to social distancing as well. Social distancing is hugely important to slowing the spread of such a contagious disease like COVID-19. However, social distancing, especially at the beginning of the outbreak in the US, was being avoided because of pictures circulating through Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat of one another out and about on social media. These misguided, and often glorified examples of ignorant behavior not only put themselves and those around them at risk, but also increase panic amongst relatives and the followers of people out during the pandemic. In the past several weeks, videos have circulated of spring breaking millennials that have been vastly criticized by news channels and as a result, a majority of the adult population. Though this problem was widespread several weeks ago, credible news organizations continued coverage and talk about the issue, leading to increased anxiety amongst older people and increased scrutiny of the younger generation. Good. So I know it's a lot. You probably could break up the paragraph here if you wanted to, where you kind of switch from food to social distancing. But overall, I like the general direction. So I'll ask you one question before we get into what others think. What is the purpose of this paragraph here for your argument? Because we know about your introduction, and then your second paragraph is where you talk about how the media contributes to this kind of like panic mentality in past situations. So what are you doing with this third paragraph here? What's the point of this paragraph?
See, this is where I was thinking I might want to revise my thesis somewhat because I feel like choosing just news media kind of narrows down my thesis a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like if I expanded that to maybe news and social media, I could talk about a lot more and really get across what I was trying to say better.
I think that works. And I think even if you took the point of news media sharing social media posts, because as you mentioned, a lot of these videos that we're seeing on news stations and stuff aren't coming from the stations themselves. They're coming from videos they find on Instagram or Facebook of people out and about having parties and stuff. They're sharing memes or information from others. In fact, a lot of news today has to be done through social media because people need to record videos at home or report from home or do whatever it is. And a lot of this is being done through Facebook Live or what have you. So I like that idea of kind of, you don't want to go too broad with it. You don't want to be like, oh, news media and social media. But I think this kind of like interesting combination of the two that's happened in this crisis is really interesting as well. So I do like that kind of focus on how social media isn't necessarily different from news media, but it kind of exponentially increases the challenges faced by consumers of media during a crisis like this. So if that's the case, that can maybe be a little bit clearer. And I think you do kind of get to it here. It's talking about how you definitely get to it by the end of this paragraph, talking about how people are sharing, videos of spring breaking millennials, et cetera. But I think that could be clear earlier on, this connection between news media and social media and how the two working together create more problems than we would normally see. Because during, for example, like back during like Hurricane Katrina or something, it's not that there wasn't social media. You had like MySpace, but that didn't have the same kind of reach that we have today between all these different platforms that we use, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, etc. So yeah, I definitely think it's a much bigger concern now. So with that in mind, I like how you start talking about food. I guess the question is for your paper, are you going to focus more on food? Are you going to focus on social kind of behaviors in general?
I mean, I want to try to do both.
I mean, your thesis leaves it open, so that way you could talk about both. And you could think of panic buying as a kind of social behavior. I just want to make sure that your thesis was accommodating enough that you weren't trying to like shift your argument around too much. Because here, both news and social media exacerbate panic. They're sharing images that catch headlines, but fail to emphasize important and sometimes necessary information to the reader. I like that because that can talk about panic buying and how seeing empty store shelves, people just kind of try even harder to buy up everything they can. I have not found toilet paper in like 4 weeks. If anyone could point me to where I could find some toilet paper, that'd be great. Neither here nor there. But it's interesting that all these stores have been sold out of these things because people feel like they need to keep going out and buying them as soon as possible. And then in terms of like the social distancing as well, I think that's really interesting because we'll see videos of people on spring break and going out and partying. And this ignores a couple of things. One, we didn't know then what we know now for any number of reasons. But when spring break happened for a lot of people, we were only just starting to be like, hey, maybe we should start canceling things. Maybe we should kind of shut things down. One of the big arguments a couple weeks ago was, oh, New Orleans didn't stop Mardi Gras, didn't cancel Mardi Gras, and that's why they have so many cases. When in actuality, when New Orleans was having Mardi Gras back in mid-February, nobody was doing anything about the virus here in the United States because it wasn't yet really a threat as far as we were concerned. So I find it interesting that they're showing these videos of people on spring break and they're trying to like find a way to blame not just millennials, but I'd say like Gen Z as well. Because like millennials, like my generation, but there's also obviously like younger generations going out there as well. They're trying to blame these younger generations, but they're not actually emphasizing how people could be behaving in a responsible manner, if that makes sense. Like you're focusing so much on the negative that you're not actually showing people the positive aspects or like what people are doing to work around these restrictions. For example, I've had a friend over in New Orleans actually, and she works at a church, and they were supposed to have like a big Easter egg hunt. Obviously, you can't do that right now. So what she did was she went around the neighborhood drawing chalk Easter eggs on sidewalks and stuff, and then encourage people to go out around in their cars and drive around and like find the Easter eggs as they drove around the neighborhood. And it was fun for the kids and it was fun for the families, but that's a way of kind of like still allowing people to have fun and to engage in certain traditions while finding ways to responsibly do so. So I do like this. This is interesting here that you focus on what the media is doing that's maybe increasing panic or maybe increasing kind of we feel a tendency more like blame others for this issue instead of like working together, instead of focusing on the positives that people are doing. I'm starting to ramble now, but does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I gotcha. So I think just kind of I wanted to add in there. Well, there's another paragraph I'm planning on doing about how nutrition. This is how I kind of wanted to tie it back into food. Mm-hmm. There's another paragraph I was going to add later about how nutrition is basically beneficial. Like I found one of those, basically someone who studied diseases in Bangladesh, and they found that actually nutrition was the leading cause of contracting some of these diseases and like recovering faster from these diseases instead of poverty and kind of living in bad conditions. So like nutrition was more important than that.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now actually, like in places like New Orleans that has, in the South in general actually, I was reading a report where because the South in general has poor healthcare systems, people generally eat unhealthier, a little bit poorer, so they have to buy less nutritional foods. So a lot of people in the South already have heart disease or diabetes or any number of issues that just kind of compounds the issues they have when they get coronavirus as well. So yeah, that makes sense to me, is like how, obviously it may not always be true because I've seen also perfectly healthy people who are incredibly ill from the coronavirus, but clearly there's some kind of correlation between, living a healthier lifestyle, eating healthy when possible, and when you don't have those resources, how that puts you more at risk too. I'm trying to think of how we would tie that back into this idea of media, though. And if anyone else has any ideas, they can absolutely speak up as well. Don't feel like it's just a conversation between me and Auden, because I know a couple of you are also focusing on other similar issues with media and social websites. I'm sorry, Auden, you were saying?
Possibly just talk about how that relates back to panic buying, like if buying food is so important, blah, 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 or nutrition so important to maintaining a healthy, like, kind of existence. Why that's one of the reasons you see people panic buying. And I can go into the reasons of panic buying because I actually have a couple more articles about that. Mm-hmm. And just kind of maybe like kind of have my beginning paragraph, or have the paragraph I just said, maybe one more example, and then kind of tie it back in at the end with kind of give the reasons people do this.
Yeah, I think there's something there, because I was just thinking about, I live not too far away from a Tom Thumb, and that's where I'll do most of my grocery shopping these days. And it's fascinating because I'll go, and the entire bread section, especially earlier on the quarantine, when quarantine was first starting, the entire bread section will be sold out. But right next to the bread section was like the host of snack cakes and everything, and those were all completely untouched. So yeah, I think there is something in between there of when people go out to panic buy, they're buying all the necessities. Yeah, you need like bread, meat, cheese, etc. But then they're going to buy all the better quality stuff first, leaving the kind of crappier stuff, the Velveeta cheese slices and everything, for people who maybe don't have as much money, or people who kind of got there late because they had to work all day, so they weren't able to get to the store until later. So I think there is a kind of cause and effect there. Just make sure you're very clear about how these things are tied together, and how, because the media acts this one way, it makes problems worse instead of actually making them better. The one thing I will say, because we're starting to run out of time a little bit, is same thing I was talking about with Ryan, is I would like to see some more kind of concrete details. I love that you bring in this idea of the news media talking about spring break and millennials and the kinds of videos they bring up. I would, if you could, find a specific news report, either online or something that brings this in, just so that we have something kind of concrete to tie it back to, so that we can say with certainty, okay, I've got at least this one example of CNN showing these spring breakers partying up in Pensacola, et cetera, et cetera. Or maybe people saying like, oh, look at New Orleans, all the fun they were having while the virus was spreading, whatever it might be. And the reason for that isn't, it's not that you're...
Where would I include that? Like, would I include that in the middle of my paragraph, or would I just make that one of my sources? And
you can include it in the middle of the paragraph, like talk about, like, you could be like, in the past several weeks, videos have circulated of spring breaking millennials that have been vastly criticized by news channels, and as a result, a majority of the adult population, for example, and then analyze an example that you found online somewhere, or even on Facebook or social media or anything, where if you find, let's say, like a local Dallas news station post a video of people at spring break partying up and say like, oh, here's people not following social distancing guidelines. You might see in the comments people saying like, oh, these stupid millennials, they don't care, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of saying like, oh, here's people actually following social distancing guidelines, it's just kind of like shifting the blame onto someone else. So it's not that your analysis is incorrect. It's actually quite right. But what I want to make sure of is that you're tying it back to something concrete, so that if say someone who wasn't me was reading this paper, and you should always assume that I'm not the only one reading these papers, were to read this and be like, hey, like, I don't think this is true. Like, they're not blaming millennials. They're not blaming people who went on spring break. You can tie it back into like, well, actually, there was this major story on CNN, Fox News, whatever it might be, and they were pretty, they made sure that they showed all these people just kind of like living this like really decadent lifestyle during their vacation. So that's what I would recommend, is having some more concrete details there just from some sources that you find. And if that means you get rid of some images or commercials or ads or whatever and bring in others, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure that you've got kind of something to latch onto.
Okay.
And I think it's more important for that one and less important for like the empty grocery stores, because we've all seen this. This is a pretty common thing. But for the spring break and millennials, that's a phenomenon pretty specific to this moment. Whether you have hurricanes or whatever, you'll always seem to run into food at grocery stores because people kind of start panicking. But when it comes to like things like Mardi Gras or Carnival or spring break, that seems to be a little bit more specific to our current moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Now we've talked enough. Others who have kind of been following along, paying attention, was there anything about Auden's, as we talked through Auden's paragraph, as we talked through his ideas, is there anything you saw that you liked that you might incorporate into your own papers, or maybe as you listen and you heard my suggestions for Auden and how he might improve his paper, something you heard, they're like, oh, that works for me as well, I'm also going to apply it to my paper? What are you taking away from this conversation today? And I'll stop sharing now, actually, too. Any questions or concerns? No, that's it? Cool. All right, then. So what I'm going to try to do today is finish grading like the last of your annotated bibliographies. I will go through whatever you've submitted so far for your first 3 pages and just provide some brief comments. Say like, oh, this works really well, good on this. Or if I notice like anything really, a big mistake or something that I saw that really needs to be kind of fixed right away, I'll comment on that. But otherwise, I'm not going to have a whole lot of opportunity to make those kind of comments. So hopefully you're following along. Hopefully you are finding something in these talks that you can take away and work on your own paper. But that's all I've got for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I can meet for office hours whenever is most beneficial to you. Otherwise, have a great Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.